good. Did you try the mulled wine?
No, didn't even have time. Just fell into bed, basically.
Hello, everybody. What we're going to do, we are going to begin. Now, Susan.
Yes?
Can we hear you on the computer? I'm going to test something here. One sec. We should hear you on the computer, but I'm not sure why. Let me just turn this. Okay, Susan.
Yep.
You can hear me? Good. Okay, Susan, can you just do your wonderful welcome everybody to our program and why we're here?
Okay. Welcome everybody to our Friday series of Zoom-inars, I guess you'd call them, at Manor Road. We'd hope to have a personal drop-in, but COVID had other ideas. So whether you're here in person or whether you're online, welcome. I hope you enjoy yourselves.
Thank you. And I'm standing over here in front of the camera, and I'm getting ready to welcome the Honorable Paul Helyer, who is not only a person of notoriety in Canada, but also a personal friend. I have been to his wonderful place with his lovely wife in Arundel. And Paul, if I started talking about what Paul has done, we'd be here till the second coming. So I won't do that. I just say for over 40 years, he was an MP. He's a part of living history, Deputy Prime Minister under Elliott Trudeau. He was also has been a builder. Comes from a family where ginseng was the crop of the day, and also brings a passion for economics and politics, religion, and UFOs. 1 second, Paul. I need to turn off my microphone, turn off the speaker, and then turn you on so we don't have terrible reverb. 1 second. That should work. Okay, thank you. 1 second. Just do test 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. JJJ.
See if they can hear. 1 second. Susan, can you hear that?
Yes, I can.
Good.
Tell me when to start, JJ.
Green light.
Green light, eh? Well, green seems to be the popular color these days. It was my favorite color when I was a child, so I'm all for it.
It's on for the Zoom.
First of all, I'm delighted to be here today, and certainly because John Joseph Mastandrea, Dr. Mastandrea, I've known for a number of years and very favorably, and we've worked together on a number of projects, including those of trying to get the religions of different sorts to work together instead of trying to kill each other. And so I'm delighted to be in your church, JJ, and to participate in this novel arrangement. I think it's a first for me. We do it, privately with a group, but I don't think I've done it this way before, and I'm somewhat looking forward to it as an experiment, and I hope it will work out okay. But what I'm going to do today is start 15. Yes, can you hear me now?
1 second. Try this.
That was a bad start, wasn't it? I'm not very good with these things either. I remember once at our lodge that JJ mentioned, there was a band came. Oh, that's it. I'm going to go crazy before I'm finished here. Some people would say not just when I'm finished, but maybe before I start, who knows. Anyway, the idea is to review the last 15 years of my life and to put them in the context of 4 different books that, in my opinion, have all been inspired books. I'm sure you know what that is, that they were not just happenstance, but that I felt led to write them for specific reasons to get certain information out into the public domain. And so 15 years ago, all I knew about UFOs, for example, was that when I was Minister of National Defense, I got sightings reports. And the sightings reports showed that about 80% of all of the reports were natural phenomena. They're Uranus or fireworks or plasma or moon glow or something, but they weren't UFOs. But the other 20% were genuinely unidentified flying objects, hence UFOs. So I didn't pay much attention to it because I was busy unifying the armed forces. And so I wasn't able to ask the kinds of questions that I would certainly ask today if I were back in that same position, because there were a lot of things going on even then that I didn't know about. And this often happens, that the permanent employees in the government will have their own little secrets, and they'll only tell the politicians what they want them to know. And I lived through that and very cognizant of it, but I just wish I'd had some of the knowledge then that I think I have now. So starting 15 years ago, roughly, first of all, my late wife, Ellen, with whom I was married for 59 years, died. And I lived as a widower for a while. And then the lady who was the widow of my best friend ever came along, and in the meantime, I'd made up my mind that I would like to remarry, and she had come to the same conclusion. Her husband had been gone for, I think, about 12 years, and so it was a time of change in my life, which was pretty fundamental in many ways. But on this specific question of the extraterrestrial presence, I'm starting off with, I got messages from a young bilingual Canadian in Ottawa, Pierre Junot. And he sent me stuff, and I was honest with him. I said, Pierre, I haven't got time to read it. And he said, well, put it on a shelf in case, for that proverbial rainy day. And I said, well, I'll do that for you. And he asked me to do 2 other things. One was to watch a 2-hour special of the ABC network in the United States, a program put together by Peter Jennings, who had been born and raised in Ottawa. And the special was all about people who had or said they had seen UFOs. And they consisted of former United States Air Force pilots and commercial pilots and policemen, air traffic controllers, who all said they had seen them. And I said to myself, why would they lie? Why would they go on a program just to lie about seeing something if they hadn't seen it? I took that away in the back of my head. The other thing Pierre did was to send me a book entitled The Day After Roswell. And it looked interesting. So I thought to myself, well, I'll take that to the lodge, when we were just talking about a minute ago, for my summer holiday, which is the only time, plus a little bit at Christmas, the only time of the year I have time to sit down and read books. And when I went to find it in 2004, I couldn't find it. So I read The Life of Pi instead, and it was very interesting, I thought. But I didn't know until I was very near the end whether it was fact or fiction. When the following year, 2005, which was the big year of the big divide, really, for me, I was looking for another book and I couldn't find it. But there, staring me in the face, was so I grabbed it and took it up and sat in one of those big Muskoka chairs, and just relaxed, looked out over the lake, started to read. And my nephew, who was there, came along and said, "What are you reading?" I told him. He said, "Well, I'm a skeptic." I said, "Well, you're entitled to be a skeptic. It's a free country, more or less, getting less all the time." And he went home. I finished reading the book, and I was absolutely convinced that it was on the level because I recognized the names of the generals, the United States Air Force generals, and the airfields and so on where the action took place. And so I said this to myself, this is the real thing. So in the meantime, Philip phoned me and said, "I told the general what you were reading," and he said, "Every word is true and more. Where can I get a copy of the book?" So I told him, it's very inexpensive, it's only about $7. And so I decided that the people of the United States and the people of the world had the right to know what was going on, because I could just envisage the United States Air Force, who shoot first and ask questions after, shooting these things down and getting us into a galactic war. And I felt that the public should be in on it. And the people of the United States didn't have a clue that they were paying for keeping track of these vehicles. So I had been invited to speak at I forgot what they called it, exopolitics, I think it was, at the University of Toronto Convocation Hall. And by two chaps, Victor Vigiani and Mike Bird, who were ufologists, follow this stuff. And I had absolutely no intention of going, of accepting. But one of my many sins is procrastination. And I hadn't told them. So all of a sudden, I decided I would do it. I would speak at their, whatever it was. And two things I had to do. One was to phone my fiance because we were getting married 1 week to the day after I was to speak. And she was not enthusiastic, if I may use an understatement. But when I said I thought it was in the public interest, she said, "Well, if you feel it's in the public interest that you have to do it, well, go ahead." And I said, "Don't worry, it'll just be a one-off. That'll be the end of it." And I have a reputation for telling the truth, but boy, that was a whopper. And I had no idea how things were going to work out. The other thing is I wanted to hear from the generals himself, his verification. And so I got Philip to call him and say that I would be getting in touch. He gave me his phone number, and I had met him before, actually. And so I phoned him, and before I could even say, "Hello, how are you?" he said, "Every word is true and more." Just like that. And then he spent the next 20 minutes telling me what the more was that included face-to-face meetings between United States officials and sentient beings from other star systems, period. And that is about as direct as you can get. He told me a lot of other things too, but he was limited by his oath because this sort of thing is very, very closely guarded, has been for years and still is, unfortunately, in most of the world. So after listening to him for 20 minutes, I was convinced. I had my wife's approval, so I phoned Vigiani and Bird and told him that I would do it. So I made some rough notes and went down and ended my little talk with that. And I said, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. And that made me the first person of cabinet rank in what was then the G8 series of countries, the major countries, to say unequivocally that UFOs were real. And it was a dubious honor, but if you start talking, I think I'll bring that water over there together. Oh, that might be sensible.
It's on wheels though, so just.
Yeah, don't push it across the room.
There you are.
Thank you. Well, after I went public, you know what all happened. Documents from all over the world came in to my office, some classified, some unclassified, and books on this subject. Dozens. I read every single one of them, cover to cover in those days. And I was briefed by one person after another, including one of the most dedicated ufologists in the whole world, Dr. Stephen Greer. And he was in Toronto. And so we met down on the waterfront and had lunch, and he briefed me for 3 hours. And one of the things that I still remember was that he had briefed the incoming president, and who had promised him to go public and tell what it was all about, Bill Clinton. But he never did. And the reason, as you can guess, is a couple of men in black suits came along and had a little talk with him. He said, well, you're the president, you can do what you like. But, and this is the gist of it, don't expect a long time in service if you do. And that has happened, I think, in one way or another to every president of the United States for a long, long time. And they have been briefed, but they have not been allowed to speak, and they have never been fully briefed. So the President of the United States has been unaware of what the forces under his command have been doing, even though he's the most powerful person in the world, allegedly, and has his finger on the atomic button. So in addition to all that, I met some interesting people. Shirley MacLaine tracked me down, and we had dinner together a couple of times. The second time, Sandra was invited to come along. Sandra was busy the first night, but she gave me her permission to have a dinner with Shirley. And Shirley was an expert in this too. And she had a wonderful source, very authentic source. And she had followed it from childhood when she'd been given a little telescope to look at the skies. And then there was a fly past of I think it was 4 or 5 UFOs over Washington when she was young, and it was in the paper still, that sort of thing was reported at that time. So she was in on it, and she told me a lot of things. And she just asked me for one reservation, that was not to tell who her principal source was, because she didn't want people to know. And I agreed, and I still have never done that and never will. So I met her, and Hans Adam, Prince of Liechtenstein, phoned me and tried to set up an appointment. And the most interesting probably was Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14. And he came to our place for dinner, and we had an interesting time. And he was raised in Roswell, and he made some sort of crack about the alleged landing in Roswell. Actually, there were 2 crashes, but they only talked about one. Most people still do. And so I said, come on. Why do you say alleged? His face all went red from embarrassment. Without blinking an eyelash, he said, how many species do you think there are? And I said, somewhere between 2 and 12. He said, yes, that's what I think too. Well, we were both very conservative. The United States Army, and I have talked to the person who actually, one person anyway, who actually was involved in retrieving crashes, either natural crashes or maybe in some cases they had been shot down by the Americans. And they had a handbook with 54 different species. But obviously there are thousands, because these are just the ones who are able to get here. And one thing my son keeps raising, and he said, well, it would take him a lifetime to get here because nothing travels faster than the speed of light. That's what we're taught. That's what Einstein said. But my source said that's not true. Gravity travels faster than light. And so these machines we're talking about, in most cases, are anti-gravity. And this is just part of the thing. There's some portholes and so on. But they can certainly get across the universe a lot faster than a lifetime, which is what a lot of people were thinking about. And I'm going to be running out of time here if I don't shut up and go on to something else. But there was an expedition in the mid-60s where 12 US astronauts were taken to the planet Circle by the EBs, who were the ones who had crashed here. And it's 38 light years away, and it took them 11 months to get there. So that gives you an idea of what is possible. Well, all of this has made me realize that I should write a book. And but first I had to do some research. We went to the Middle East to find out what was going on there. We stopped in London and were briefed by Nick Pope. If you're in this business, you would have heard his name. He was the UFO person he was at the UFO desk in the Department of Defense in London for the United Kingdom. And he was limited as to what he could say, but he gave me 2 cases that had somehow gotten into the public domain. And one of them is the Bentwaters forest case, which is very, very popular known and is so well authenticated that nobody could read about it and deny that it was real. And he gave me the name of the deputy commander there, who we thought would talk to me. And then we went on to Israel and the West Bank. And unfortunately, we found that Israelis were treating the Palestinians abominably. And we were very disappointed to find that out. When Senator and I were in Washington for a National Prayer Breakfast, it's an annual affair down there, I phoned Colonel Howell. And first he said, well, I don't talk about these things. And then he said, but if Nick Pope recommended you, I'll see you. So I went down to his gated community. He bought lunch and talked for 2 hours. And I recorded the whole thing. And nearly all of it is in the first book right at the end of the tunnel. That's this one here, which was the first one to get into this sort of thing at all. And the gist of it is that, oh, thank you. See if I can hold my hand up for a while. The gist of it is that the colonel had the non-commissioned officers report sightings out of the forest, but they had taken them with the usual skepticism. Everybody said, oh, you're a little nuts, or those were some lights from across the other side of the whatever. And so on Christmas Eve, they were having a banquet to give awards to outstanding soldiers, and well, in this case, airmen mostly. And so about halfway through the dinner, the NCOs came in and said, there's another sighting in the forest. So the commanding officer said to Colonel Halt, who was the 2IC, the second in command there, he said, you go and deal with them. So Halt, to try and give you almost his exact words, went out, got a group, and he said, I'm going to put an end to this damn nonsense once and forever. And what he saw changed his life forever. And he not only talked to me, he talked to a lot of other people. He's written a book himself on it to give you his experience. And then I flew to Las Vegas for a concert, not a concert, but a meeting out there to see what was new before I just actually started to write. And it was called the 5th Annual UFO Crash Conference, November 2007. It was sponsored by a chap by the name of Ryan Wood and his father, Dr. Robert Wood. And Ryan arranged a top secret briefing just for the two of us, his father and me. And it was fascinating. It was done by some intelligence officers who had worked there, but they didn't break their oaths. They just sort of skirted around. And they had some pictures that were taken probably by Google from the stratosphere from way up. And these tiny little trucks going out over the desert and then just disappearing into a hole. And we never figured out what they were doing there, but we're probably developing new, more efficient weapons, something like that anyway. But very few people ever mention that number, so it just shows you how much sensitivity there is in keeping things. And then there were two people who had been abducted by UFOs, Travis Walton and Jim Sparks. And I wanted to hear from them directly what they had to say. And I interrogated each of them for hours until I was absolutely convinced that they were telling the truth. There's just no way that they could have been avoiding it. So finally, became ready to write, and this light at the end of the tunnel was the product. And it began with a dire warning that we had 10 years to do something about global warming. And then went on to the subjects that we have been discussing. And my best line in that book, and I don't often boast, or try not to, but I like this line. I didn't know how much I didn't know because I didn't know how much there was to know. That is as true today as it was 10 years ago. So that's the end of book number 1. And we'll put it at the bottom of the list here.
So just a suggestion, perhaps we keep track of our questions to the end, because we're going to go through 4 books and then.
Well, say again, JJ.
We go through the 4 books and keep track of our questions to the end. How about that?
Yeah, keep the questions. Yeah, that would be good. The second book, and it's kind of fun around our place, is that this is my last book. I thought it was opus magnus or whatever they call these things, when you sort of get it all out and have nothing more to say. But during the next 4 years, I learned so much more. This is absolutely, totally amazing. And after 4 years, I felt I had to write a second book. It was called The Money Mafia, A World in Crisis. And I'll start when George Bush Sr., President George Bush Sr., announced the New World Order. I don't know if you're all familiar with the New World Order, but it sounded like utopia. It sounded as if we were going to have a world of perfect harmony, and there would be food and shelter and clothing for everybody, and all would live happily ever after. Well, unfortunately, that isn't what they had in mind. What they had in mind was an unelected, unaccountable world government of, by, and for the elite rich. And it was to be fascist in nature. And more recently, it's been identified as a Fourth Reich. And the sponsors are an informal group that I and others have labeled the Cabal. And the Cabal comprises the Bavarian Illuminati, the Three Sisters, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and then the banking cartel, which is also part of the Bilderbergers, the oil cartel, the international corporations, and then the transnational corporations, and then the intelligence agencies, including the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the British MI6, and the Israeli Mossad. And finally, a huge swath of the US military. And they're all in it together. Especially, it was the Air Force and the Navy who were involved. And there's an Operation Paperclip that you should be aware of. At the end of World War II, the United States was very anxious to get some of the best scientists from Germany to help them in their fight with Russia, for the Cold War. And so they recruited a whole lot of them. And President Truman gave his approval, but he said nobody who has been close to the Nazi Party, nobody who was a real Nazi is included. And but they didn't pay any attention to that because all of these senior people had been involved in the Nazi Party. And just a little while after that was Operation High Jump. There were 2 or 3 groups who realized that Hitler wasn't going to win. One of them, the Council on Foreign Relations, came to that conclusion in November 1940, and started working on the American empire that would replace it with all of the land that Hitler wanted, all of North America and the Pacific Rim countries. So we were on the list. And then along comes the Cabal, the people who augmented it, and they all really formed ranks and became one organization. So the Germans themselves knew that they weren't going to win. So what they did, they started building this base in Antarctica. and sent their best scientists down there and their support group. And I think they had about 2,000 Scandinavian girls down there to support them. And so in effect, they were building a new Berlin, sort of a government in waiting, as it were. What I've only found out in the last month or two is that they started building it at the beginning of the war and didn't wait to the end of the war. And so the Americans knew about this and they wanted to do something about it. So the first US Defense Secretary, James Forrestal, sent a flotilla to take it out. And the task force comprised 4,700 men, 13 ships, including one aircraft carrier, and 33 aircraft. They refueled in South America on the way down, and they got there and they were all ready to go to battle. And 2 flying saucers came up out of the ocean and sank one of their ships and killed some of their men. And they had to turn around and go home. Byrd was absolutely livid, as you can imagine. They got back to the United States, he wanted to nuke them. But by that time, the Nazis from Paperclip operation and others had gained control of the US military, and nothing was ever done. And they've been working there ever since, to the best of my knowledge. So there's one interesting thing that would interest you, and this is how they get away with lying. If you look in Wikipedia, it tells you the truth about Operation Paperclip. But if you go to Operation High Jump, they tell you how many ships and so on, but they say it was for some reason. It wasn't for the reason I just gave you, which was the real reason. It was just to go down and take a look around, and maybe they could do something down there. It is enough to make your blood boil that people would put that kind of a direct lie up for everybody to accept as the truth. Well, I'm sure some of you, if you're into this at all, have heard of areas 51 and S4. And Dr. Michael Wolff, who was one of the people who was working in both the 51 and S4 and had a security clearance higher than that of the United States president, in a radio broadcast 20 years ago this year, just before he died, said that the size of Area 51 was about the same size as Rhode Island and getting bigger every day. And S4 was the sister base just a few miles away, connected by a very fast train. And it was probably about the same size, I think, from what you can guess. And what they were doing there, of course, was back engineering the UFO that they got from Roswell, and another one that the EBs, those are the people from Surfville, had actually given them. And one might say, hey, Trojan horse, beware of the EBs carrying gifts, because I think that's probably exactly what happened. But I'm going to skip the next thing here about the US and the building a base called Dulce, where they had built it in cooperation with the EBs, 8 stories high, starting from the ground down, and you had to have a higher classification for every story down. And they had, well, it's a story that you can find out more about in the Money Mafia if you're interested. But it's not a good story. Well, they actually had a war there to try and rescue some of the captives that were down there that they said were just people who had gone off their mind, and they were going to experiment with them in the same way that some of Hitler's people had been experimenting during the 30s. But strangely, somebody was able to find out that one of them was not crazy, and they checked, and he was a missing person. So they had kidnapped hundreds of people and had them down there for medical experiments. And this led to anyway, they had a war. Finally, they rescued a lot of the people. Then somebody touched a button that blew the place up, which was sort of what happened if they wanted to, stop any further incursion. And there were only about 40 people who survived it. And one of them is a person by the name of Phil Schneider, a government engineer, structural engineer, again with a very high security clearance. And he had been working underground for 17 years in what we call the black projects. The black projects are really, they call them special projects. But he was involved in this and found out what was going on with the New World Order. And he was so disgusted, he resigned and went public. And these are some of his claims. The black budget comprised 15% of the gross domestic product of the United States. And when he spoke, there were 129 deep underground military bases, large cities connected underground by high-speed magnetic leviton trains with speeds up to Mach 2. The depth of the bases is over a mile, basically whole cities underground. They were all about 2.66 to 4.25 cubic miles in size. And they have a laser drilling machine that we could certainly use in Toronto that can do 7 miles of tunnel for a day. And maybe we would live long enough to see the completion of the Eglinton. But, that's just shows you. And then he said, one of his friends told him about a contract to build 10,720 railway cars, each with 143 pairs of shackles. For whom? Why would they want railway cars with shackles? Who are they going to put in shackles? And then there are black helicopters, armed black helicopters. At that time, there were 64,000 in the United States. He said there was another one built every hour. All this, nothing to do with the Cold War. For what? What was it all about? Well, Schneider knew that his life was in danger, so he committed suicide. And if you believe that, he would stand waiting for Santa Claus to come down the steps. Allegedly put a garden hose around his neck and pulled it. And that was the United States justice system ruled that it was a suicide, which tells you something about what I have to say about the Justice Department in my final book. Well, all of this contributed to the title of The Money Mafia, A World in Crisis. As usual, when I write a book, as always, when I write a book saying everything that's gone wrong, I put in solutions. And I put some in there too, to start with a new oath and start with the president. and make everybody take a new oath of allegiance to the republic or to the, or not, and if not, to be discharged. And anyway, you can read all about it if you're interested. Then the next book is called Hope Restored, an Autobiography. And this book is unique for me because the number of pages of new material, yet I felt that it had to be public. So, oh, sorry, Eric. You weren't looking me in the eye and giving me the
And again, you have talks on both sides. And by the way, we have a test on.
In order to make it into book size, I tacked on my autobiography. And some of it's worth reading. If you're interested in Canadian politics, you, I think, enjoy most of it. But it's the last 10 chapters or so that are different. I started out with the 9/11 because it has been so controversial. And in my first book, I said there were a lot of things that didn't add up. But by the time I got here, I knew that it was a fake job. It was what they call a red flag job. It was undertaken basically by the Israeli Mossad with the knowledge and consent of the United States government who participated in it. And they killed all these people in order to get a license to start wars in the Middle East. And so the official report is just full of holes, but they managed to get away with that somehow. And I'll not elaborate on that, but because I want to get to the new material. One of the chapters in the book is one where I talk about the still small voice that led to the road back. And what it was really when I decided to submit myself to the Creator God and to do things His way or her way, rather than my own way. And it's an interesting story, I think, but it changed my life naturally forever. It took me a long while to sort of grow into it, but it has developed over the years into a relationship with the Creator that is very, very close, as close as a father-son relationship, actually closer in many ways, because I asked some what you would call trivial questions, like whether to take 1 or 2 pills and get an answer and know that I wouldn't have to get a second opinion. So we start out this with these things. How many of you are familiar with remote viewing? Just one.
Remote viewing.
This is where some individuals are trained to take their mind and project it out into the universe and sort of have not, in order to gain knowledge from the whole universe of what's happened for thousands or millions of years back and so on. And it's quite a trick. It started with the Russian military forces picked up by the Americans. Again, so secret that one of the American officers that was doing it thought it should be made public. And they tried to kill him, and then they tried to kill his family when they were sleeping. And Morehouse was his name. It's an interesting book to read if you're looking for, and it wasn't fiction again, it was the real thing. He was eventually exonerated by people like me and others. But there's a Dr. Courtney Brown, Farsight Institute, that I met in the course of my various escapades across the continent. And he has written a book called Cosmic Voyage, 36 chapters about various ETs, etc., and religions, the Buddha, Jesus, and finally, God. And I'm going to read some of this because it gets very personal, and this is the only part of my speech I'll read. But there are a few things that I want to say that are pretty. So Courtney Brown came to the conclusion that God had blown itself up, and that was the Big Bang, as it's known. And that was the beginning of the cosmos, and the beginning of the evolution of all things. I have a sketch at the back with the pictures of my last two books that NASA made, showing that it's approximately 13.77 billion years in our time since the Big Bang took place. So we have been evolving all of this time. And it's not, it's not a foolish thing to say it's creation or science, because God created everything. He put the seeds, as I call them, into the instructions, into all of the particles as to what they were to do. And so he created everything, and it's creation, but on a scientific level, instead of just what we were taught at the Sunday school level. In my case, many, many years ago. So in 2017, it was a momentous revelation for me. Walking down the street, thought occurred to me, God always responded to my questions. And I have said one day, are you my guardian angel? Or are you the real thing? And the answer was, I am the real thing. And immediately the words universal consciousness sprang into my mind. God is everywhere at the same time. And it helped me understand when Jesus is talking about even the hairs on your head are numbered. Because I had thought, well, that wouldn't be any problem with my head anymore anyway. At one time I had hair, but it means that God is not only with us, God is in us. And I reread what Courtney Brown had said, with the eyes of God. And I had lost an email from my Pierre Junot again, who had been briefing me on this. And one day, I let this information lie fallow for a while, and then one day I said, as I said, in the meantime, I had grown very, very close to my Heavenly Father. And I decided to ask the question directly, but reverently. Question, is it true that you blew yourself up? Source, something like that. That was enough to satisfy me for several weeks, although I thought the answer was less than definitive. As time went by, and because I had already concluded that I was being encouraged to write another book to complete the trilogy of inspired books, I decided that I had to have the courage to ask the question again. So the question was, the last time that we discussed this question as to whether or not you had blown yourself up, you said something like that. I would like to know whether you did or didn't. Yes or no? Source, the answer is yes. Well, needless to say, I was grateful for the candor because it put a whole new light on the greatest mystery of the universe. Sorry, I have numb thumbs and fingers, and
did pay our heating bill.
We'll get there eventually. Some weeks later, when I was still in Crete, vacationing with Sandra's family, the subject came up one more time when I was praying silently. You said you blew yourself up. Yes. This was a conscious, deliberate decision on your part? Source, it was. Question, you know that I will quote you. Source, that is what you are supposed to do. I was neither the first nor the only one to come to the conclusion that God was the omnipresent creator. My mind went back to the night Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell had dinner at our condo. Sandra had asked him directly if he believed in God. He said, no, if you mean an old man with a beard somewhere in the sky. Later, however, and I had forgotten this until I looked back at my diary. Later, he added, I believe that the universe is God's body. Then there was Shirley MacLaine's book. When I was writing this chapter, I consulted her book, Going Within, and couldn't find the information I was searching for. But skimming to the end, however, I came across her interview with the late Stephen Hawking, where she I have to get some new thumbs. So this, if, as Hawking's and other scientists say, the Big Bang explosion resulted in life as we know it today, and the seeds of all things, ourselves included, were present at the birth of creation. It is true that the God particles flew out of the vortex into the void, but not before they had received precise instructions as to how they should act, interact with each other, and grow to become the stars that gave us light and warmth, the water that is essential to life, and a plethora of streets of trees, plants, and animals to aid us and sustain us. Our Creator must have had a love of beauty. Anyone who has seen pictures taken by the Hubble telescope will appreciate that the cosmos is infinitely beautiful. There is nothing comparable. Closer to our home, our planet is a joy to behold. In the course of writing my first book, almost 50 years ago, pardon me, I had the good fortune to visit 26 different countries. My unforgettable impression is that every one of those countries is beautiful, each in its own way. My wife, Sandra, and I have always felt close to God when we watched the sun rise or set, when we viewed the stars in the sky, or walked in the woods, or enjoyed the thunder and lightning of a summer storm. What we did not know was that every hill and mountain, every field and forest, every stream and river, every tree and flower, every stone and thistle, as well as every calm or raging ocean, is God incarnate. They all consist of God particles, as do our cities and factories. All particulate matter in the cosmos comprises God's body. Paramount to earthlings is that we are all God's children and made in his image. That does not mean that we look like him, but that we are part of him and he is part of us. It doesn't matter about the color of our skin. We are all equal. We are brothers and sisters. There is no doubt in my mind that our Father is not pleased when those of us with white skin either think or act as if we are in some way superior to our siblings. We are not. The same might be said when any of us treat LGBTQ with less respect than we would expect from others. Regardless of sexual orientation, all of us are equally God's children. Consequently, as I said in Light at the End of the Tunnel, what God has created, let no man or woman disdain. Well, I've gone an hour, so we'll skip book number 4 and start taking questions, I guess, JJ, if that's the...
Yeah, we're gonna do this. One second, can you just hand me that for a second? And we're gonna be very conscious. Well, let's say the first round is thank you, Paul. You've taken us out of the universe and back again, and we could talk for about 5 years, I think, if we start now. But, and so actually, Joanne, can I use your help keep an idea, maybe of people in the room, and I'll keep an idea of the chat, and so we don't lose track. Let's start with the people on the TV land. But if you do want to talk, what we're going to try to do is keep track of, so we don't lose the number in order. So why don't you, let's find out now who in the room does want to talk, and then we'll keep track of that. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. You're bouncing up and down. Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. Let's remember that. Let's start with the chat.
And then we'll go around the room after the chat.
After you. Yes, that's the idea. Okay, so we're going to start with our TV audience, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. But if you type in the chat with your questions, that might be easier than me trying to figure out the interface of sounds in the room. So if you could, maybe you can type in the chat.
John Joseph, may I ask a question while the chat's coming in?
Yeah.
Can I start a question while the
Why don't
chat's
we do
coming in so that
Yeah.
we can deal with the tech part?
Yeah.
Paul, I'm just wondering, why do you think you haven't been silenced?
Why I haven't been silenced? Because the Creator so far hasn't wanted it. I've had a couple of tangles, but so far they've never knocked me out. And at my age, I keep saying, well, the worst they can do is shoot you. And I have a very good idea of what happens then, and it's not something that I fear. And so I just trust and obey, and the day may come when somebody does bump me off. And especially if you read the part of the final chapters of my 4th book that I haven't discussed today, but is the latest one. And no, that's a risk you have to take, and either I have to fulfill my what I believe to be my commission or default. And so I've so far at least tried to do exactly what I was expected to do, and will continue to do so as long as I can keep going and keep upright and so all that sort of thing.
John Joseph, do we have chat?
They might not. Not everyone's learning about how to do this stuff. 1
So do
second.
you mind if we do some room questions?
Yeah, so I'll just tell people, please type your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, let's start in the room then. Alex, did you have something?
Actually, yes. When I just came in today and I've not met you before, I think your comment when you saw me was realizing that I was into astronomy and all that was, oh, then we'll disagree on a lot of things.
I'm sorry?
I think your comment was because I was interested in astronomy and I have been since I was a little kid, that I think your comment was, oh, we might disagree on a few things. We might not agree on things. Tell you the truth. Nothing would make me more happy than to have then to have, positive proof of alien contact, that would be great. And within my lifetime, as I think I've talked to everybody here about in my little talk, even if we've discovered microorganisms on another planet that weren't some sort of contamination that were actually developed on another planet, then we found life elsewhere. So I'm a firm believer, to tell you the truth, in life throughout the universe. I think we have a very living universe. The thing is, though, aliens coming here in UFOs, I have to tell you that I keep an open mind, and I'm very, very open-minded on that. Okay, I'm very, very open-minded on that subject. So,
Now, sorry, I'm just having trouble with that. Do you mind? Would you feel comfortable?
Can you take your mask off while you speak?
sure. Anyway, so my question actually would be, it's too bad, and it's just reflection too, it's too bad that the scientific community does not have the proof it needs to verify. Scientists really want reproducible data, to accept it. And a lot of scientists, they would tend to be very skeptical about UFOs. Now, I keep a very open mind about it. Nothing would please me more, but I wish, is there a way that you can think of the scientific community would be able to have some verifiable results that they could agree on? So then we would know more about the truth of all this.
I'm sure that there will be more evidence as time goes by, but I think the problem with many of the scientists I've talked to, you have to have a will to want to learn. And I wrote a letter yesterday to a professor in a Southern American university who wanted me to go down there and talk to his pupils. He thought it would be something they would enjoy very much. And so he raised it with somebody, and they're just absolutely, totally negative. Didn't want to hear about it. And I've gone through that with a number of professors, them saying something about, well, if we ever see anybody or whatever, and I say, well, when did you look? Because the United States government has had at least one EB, as we call them, working for them and with them from the day that the Roswell crash occurred. And they've had a lot of help, and there are a lot of EBs in 3 or 4 different species who have been working with them in the Black Ops. And there are thousands of pages of stuff that the CIA has released that if you comb through them and do your homework, you say, wow, there's a lot of stuff there, and they haven't started telling the truth yet. When I say telling the truth, of trying to get the truth out. And they're just, in the last few weeks, made a little bit of an effort. The Navy said that they'd chased some UFOs, and this hit the papers. But they said they didn't know what they wanted. Well, you have to analyze that statement. They were the first ones to fish a UFO out of the Pacific Ocean in 1945. And they've been working at this idea of recreating a Space Force ever since. And they know that they have already now, all of a sudden, a Space Command. Well, what's the Space Command force for spaceships? The United States has a huge armada of spaceships, and they're starting to condition the American people a little bit at a time. And the New York Times had something in recently, and I said to myself, well, that would have been used 50 years ago. but they've been hiding it all this time. And they haven't let any president go and visit areas 51 and S4 and all of the other underground facilities to see what's going on. And they haven't let the heads of the intelligence committees of the House and the Senate. They briefed them so far, and then that's as far as they go. But the evidence is there, and a lot of it is in print, because there are whistleblowers, especially when they retire, who start telling the truth and putting it out from people like me who are writing about it.
Excuse me, Paul, we'll just get that question from. Make sure everybody's kind of. Thanks so much.
Have you heard of Ospinski?
Sorry,
Ospinski, the guy who wrote a theory. It's O-U-S Ospinski or something like that, the name.
I'm sorry,
And
I
his
didn't.
theory is that there's only so much knowledge in the universe and that only some people can have that knowledge. Have you ever read about that, or has anybody ever heard about that? I read about it.
You're saying that he says there's just limited knowledge in the universe?
Yeah, and that not everybody has that knowledge.
And only if
So
we-
that kind of, there's these intellectuals that ordinary people shouldn't know about certain things.
Well, I disagree totally. I think ordinary people should know exactly what's going on. And I think they're all adults and they should be told the truth. And I was going to say about my beloved statement of not knowing how much there is to know, that it's just like what is a roll that's opening up in both directions to infinity. And I don't know, I think that's enough for anybody to know if they can ever get to the end of that.
Why don't we ask, who was the next question? Jen? Yeah, excuse me. We'll just do this. I'll hold it. You have your great presentation.
I just want to follow up on something that Alex started asking. Are you actually saying there are alien beings living here right now and working with people?
Yes.
That is your question.
Well, I want to, what do they look like? Where do they come from?
One second.
They look various ways. The little grays, you've probably seen pictures of them in the comic books or the papers, are very short, long skinny arms, long skinny legs, a slit for mouth, ears, and great big heads and great big eyes. And that is sort of the view of some. Most of the people in our galaxy look like us. I suspect we're cousins. There was a chap, a Valiant Thor, who lived in the Pentagon for 3 or 4 years, and this is documented. I mean, I've got a picture of it in my book. It's the kind of guy I would want to come home if my daughter ever wanted to find somebody that she'd like. And incidentally, he has an IQ of 1200. And he came here from Venus, where it's not supposed to be inhabitable, but it is. And he tried to talk our leaders into an exchange that we could have their technology on medicine and agriculture and so on. In other words, the kind of wonderful life that I thought a New World Order should conjure up instead of this mess we've got, that we could have that if we would just give up our atomic weapons. Because most of our neighbors are petrified for fear we'll blow ourselves up. They say, and I believe we have done that at least once before, maybe more. Did you go back to the time of the Atlanteans and I forgot the other people that were there at the time, and they made the earth uninhabitable. And they think that we might do the same. And they don't want us to do that for two reasons. For one, the universe, the cosmos, is a one, it's a unity. And if we put off one atomic bomb, it goes right through the universe. And they don't like that. Second, they'd like to come and visit and maybe to trade with us eventually, because there is some of that going on now, according to some of my friends. And so they're petrified that we're playing with matches, and they would like us to give them up in exchange for the kind of life that would be, in effect, idyllic. Because most of the majority of the species are God-fearing. We call them the Galactic Federation of Light. And they call God the one, or the source, or the forever. But it's all the same thing. And they're all together on the side of what we call the light. Well, then there are a couple of species, including one section of the Ibis, of the Graves, just one section. And they're working with another group, and they're the troublemakers, and they're on the side of the errant sun. Call them what you like. Pardon me?
Sorry, on the side of what?
Is it Aaron's son?
Airing side.
Yeah, Satan,
Okay.
the evil one.
Erroring son. Okay, so right.
And so that's the dark side. And what we're really basically seeing, and I go into this in my final book because it's very real at the moment, is a war between good and bad, between light and dark. And fortunately, the Galactic Federation of Light is on our side, and they have spaceships parked up above, waiting, I think, to break a rule of their own. A rule of their own is non-interference. But to break that rule, if they really have to. And so I'm hoping that's true, because the power of the cabal militarily is unequaled in our history, our current history. And there's no sense trying to fight them. What I have suggested in my final book is defunding them. And if we could get enough Americans to get the Congress to just cut off their money, because they have to have help from us, and they have to have money to operate. So the only way to do it would be to defund them. And this applies to the CIA too. The CIA is total Nazi. And it has been for decades. And that's the reason they're so evil. They're the ones that go for waterboarding and meddling in everybody else's business and trying to overthrow governments and then getting all upset if somebody wants to interfere in theirs. So, yeah, and I guess I personally have not seen visitors from other planets, but I've been in the same room with them. And I knew that they were there because they put their hands on my head.
Excuse me, Paul. I think Don wanted a question. No. Who was next? Great. Excuse me, sir. Okay. So I'm waiting my.
I don't know what the camera might not work so well.
They would probably work. We're technologically challenged.
Sure.
Well,
Well,
thank you very.
thank you so much. And not so much that I have a question, just more an expression of thanks. And also, I've been going through a huge amount of change recently, philosophically, spiritually, all sorts of different things. And I suppose it all began when I started to hear about mycelium, which is the network of fungi and so forth underneath the ground, and the little bits of mycelium that we see are the fruity mushrooms. Well, I never understood that they connected to tree root systems, and they actually communicate chemically, and they can do all sorts of things. So now I go into a forest, and I'm sort of scared in a way, because what are they actually thinking about me? But it's challenged me at the very basis. If I can't look at a tree and say, oh, that's a tree, my mind is just open. So I'm really appreciative that you have risked your personal reputation, your money, all of these things to bring this to light. And it's hard for people to understand. And I recognize that. But it's kind of like once you take those blinders off, you can't put them back on comfortably ever again. And I would like to ask, I suppose, wrap it up with a question. The fellow that you had spoken about that lived in Washington, D.C. and was talking about the alien that was trying to make the peace between Earth and giving up the atomic weapons. I've heard of that and I've seen photographs of the man.
Yeah.
And he was well accepted in society. And I don't think he hid very much. But what ended up happening to him? I never did find out how. Did he just go away?
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
He flew back to Venus when,
Thanks.
1 sec. Back to you. Okay, there we go. Okay.
yes, I think he satisfied himself that he wasn't going to make a deal. And actually, there were some politicians who were favorable, who put the interests of the people first. But the chiefs of staff, who were really running the show, and the cabal, who don't really care about us because they have other plans for the planet, they said no. And so after quite a long period of time of being right together, working with the people in the Pentagon, he and his small group went back to the spaceship and went home.
Excuse me, Paul. Okay. You do this? Okay.
So, Paul, what you're saying is quite powerful. Just a comment, back to your Venus question. So it's interesting, C.S. Lewis wrote a lot of books about things like that. But we've since found that Venus did have life like Earth 2 billion years ago, but they've actually found 50 kilometers up a temperature zone of 50 to 80 Fahrenheit or Celsius, where there are plant-like material that actually captures light. So there's well, I'm not sure it's that. But so there's an atmosphere up there like that. Then they found water on the moon, and they found water on Mars, and they found water on several moons, Jupiter, Saturn, and a couple of others. And so seawater, which is where life happens, where life takes place. So in many ways, what we're finding is what we're talking about. And what's your comment about all these new findings? Is this part of that open the eyes moment that the always was there? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think information is going to creep out slowly. What I'm afraid of is that something terrible might happen before most of the people realize that something might happen. And at the end of my latest book, I'll mention a few things that I cannot verify, but the author, Len Kasten, is one of the best ufologists, and in my opinion, has some of the best informants, government informants that there are. And he says that the Nazis have bases on Mars and the moon, and two or three bases on Mars and the moon. And I actually met and heard a chap that I didn't know what his rank was when I heard him. He spoke at the Exopolitics Symposium here in Toronto 2 years ago, or a year ago, a year and a half ago, the last one that we held that I spoke at. And he said he worked at the bases on Mars for 17 years. And that they are, he gave a, you know, what he said makes what I say kind of primitive in a way. And so I don't recommend his book for beginners because you have to take this stuff in spoonfuls, ever larger spoonfuls, until you can absorb it. But he said there that there was going to be an attack with between 6 and 28 months or something like that time. And he's still in the Marine Corps. He didn't say who was going to attack whom. He said there were going to be 3 attacks, one and then another one and another one. And so I hesitate to mention that, but it's in print. You can get Len Caston's latest book and read it for yourself and say it's a lot of nonsense. If you want to, that's fine. And but this is the guy who said some of it. As blood and flesh. I've seen him and met him and listened to him speak. And consequently, I just don't write him off, and especially when he's talking about bad news, which I think is coming from his commanding officer, who's probably part of the bad news. And so, but at the same time, I know that a lot of good things are happening, and I thought maybe somebody was sort of hinting at it. And that is that Earthlings are the bottom of the list as far as most things. We're in the third dimension, and our capacity is very limited, and so on. And there is a move underfoot, and I don't know that we are the sponsors, but we're the partakers of it, some of it, to increase our dimension to the 4th or 5th. In other words, to bring us up to the level that some of our cousins have achieved, because they can do things we can't do. Some of their medicine, for example, looks like magic. And
Paul, before we bring our time to a close, can you just mention to people that one, you'll be able to buy the book if they want here, or just look at your screen and say to people online, if they want to buy your book online, they can also do that?
So, you know, I have all of my books on sale here for $20 each, or any 3 for $50. And if you want a lot more information that I have given you today, that would be the way to get it, because Alan Dulles, who was the American who brought most of the Nazis into the CIA when he was director of the CIA, was once asked, how could you get away with bringing so many Nazis into the US? He said, it's because Americans don't read books. Yeah. Pardon me?
Don't read books.
Oh.
And I said, well, Canadians aren't much different from my experience, because I've just finished my 16th book. And my wife, late wife, used to say, another book to creep silently across the land.
Well, Paul, let's figure a time to close. And so I will, on behalf of everyone here, I want to say thank you and thank you. And to our studio audience out there in Zoom land, thank you for tuning in. And we'll put our hands together and say thank you, Paul. We're going to turn our Zoom platform off, or turn the recording off anyways. And for people a chance maybe for an informal, because you want to maybe buy some books, or you can do book signing, so we have time for that. So thank you again. Next week we're going to have Betty Kellman talk about nursing and history of nursing. Yes. Thank you, Paul.
It's a pleasure.